like
Yeah,
a
what is
lake
it?
state too.
No, they're either on or off.
There is some
There's no
suits,
dimmer.
some equipment, and some
I don't think
extraction
so.
equipment, and bales and suits and gloves. If you're interested in that stuff, you might want to check and see if the store still have it, if they're still doing a good sale. Also, I was told, your dad along, I didn't realize, what I was saying for our B yard, we need the crushed gravel or the crushed tile for the B yard. We don't need it for the B yard. We need it for the road to get to our B yard. It's not for the bees on the B yard. So if you're newer at it, or you haven't got a B yard, you're thinking, why do they need crushed asphalt and crushed concrete? We need it from the long muddy road. We need to shore it up a little bit. So that's the purpose of that. Okay, so without any further ado, we have a special speaker who's going to talk to you about mites, other beekeeping issues. Queen raising? Okay. I haven't heard all of them. Oh, you got the queen bird, okay. Okay, queen rearing.
All right, good. Hi everybody, I'm Tucka. Can people hear me? Raise your hand if you can't hear me. This is my favorite exercise. Okay, really, you can't hear me?
The mic is on.
Okay. All right, maybe I use this then. Hello? Okay, I'm just gonna hold this. All right, can you hear me now? Everybody good? Great. Awesome. I'm Tucka. I run about 150 colonies in Florida and New York. I raise queens and I sell nukes. I also do bee removals and I produce a very small amount of honey that I mostly give away. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about raising queens. I was torn between doing a queen handling talk that I think some people in the room have already heard, which I did at the Florida State Beekeepers Association meeting, and doing this one. How many people in the room here have seen a queen? How many people have held a queen? All right. How many people know what a mating nuke is?
What?
A mating nuke. How about a cell raiser? All right. I think we're gonna be right about on par. It's gonna be beginning queen raising. I'm gonna introduce you to some new words, and we're gonna just have a little dialogue and see some cool pictures about raising queen bees. And in the meantime, I'm gonna pass around a few little tools of the trade here. There's a grafting tool here. You can take the little yellow cap off it and experiment with plunging the little plunger on there. It's spring loaded. We got a cell cup, and then a queen cage with a cap that goes on it. And then a queen bee with a few attendants in there. So, let's see. Every time I think about queen raising, I really start out thinking about swarms. So a swarm is the way that the bees naturally raise their own queen. There's kind of two main ways that it happens. One is swarming, and one is an activity called supersedure. Supersedure is when the bees decide that the queen is no longer worth protecting and feeding and taking care of, and that they're actually going to raise a different queen, and so they will kill that queen and raise a queen cell from one of her 1 to 3 day old larvae, and then that will requeen the hive and change the genetics, or even just something as basic as giving the colony a break in the brood cycle. Who knows? Everybody know what the brood cycle is? Brood cycle is basically the period of time that it takes from when the pupa is capped to when the bee emerges, and when that's happening, the mites are in that cell breeding. And so the more opportunity that they have to do that, the more overrun with mites the hive will become. And the less often you break and interrupt that cycle, the more likely you are to have a mite problem if you don't treat with chemicals. Swarming is a bee's natural defense against mites and a number of other things. I personally love swarms. This is a picture of me taken by Sam Comfort standing in the middle of a swarm in upstate New York, summer of 2016, I think. These are really gentle in this state. They're nothing to be afraid of, nothing super scary or intimidating. They're really just only focused on finding the queen and being with her and finding a new home to live in. This is the swarm that stole my heart. I was in England in 2013, and I had just discovered bees for the first time. It was my birthday, and this small swarm landed in a pine tree. I held the ladder up while they were catching the swarm, and I got stung in the face twice. And I decided that this was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me, and that I needed to do this for the rest of my life. This is the same swarm later, after having flown away and settled again on a different branch. Heidi Herman, my first beekeeping mentor, holding, again, the same swarm on a little branch. In England, often they'll catch swarms using a skep, which is a straw basket woven out of rye straw. And you'll see the swarm hanging, hopefully somewhere where you don't have to climb a ladder to get it. You take the straw basket and you turn it upside down, and then you hold it under the swarm and you shake, or have someone else shake vigorously the branch, and all the bees fall down into the basket. Then you turn that basket over, preferably onto a white sheet or something that will help you step on less bees. I rarely actually have something like that available. Sometimes I use a shirt. And then you wait and see if the bees stay in the skep. If they stay in the skep, then you got the queen. If they don't, you probably didn't get the queen, or there might be 2 or 3 queens in the swarm, which happens a lot more often than you might think. This is a sign that it is about time to start raising queens. If you want to raise queens, you want to see forage like this. This happens to be a canola field in England. This could just as easily be palmetto in Florida, or coconut palm flow in Florida, or Brazilian pepper even. You can raise queens in the fall here on Brazilian pepper because the flow is so good. Any time of year when the nutrition is high, there's a lot of pollen coming in, there's a lot of nectar coming in, the hives are fat, the bees are vigorous, they're foraging a lot, you're smelling that bee bread smell. Is everybody smelling that here? We're definitely smelling that over on the East Coast. That's when you know that you can start getting into these experiments about raising queens. Whether you want to do that on a commercial scale, or in your backyard, or by making splits, or even just catching swarms. This is what you want to look for before you try it. This is a swarm that landed on a Lazuten hive, which is a really interesting box. It's the width of it is the same as the length of the Langstroth 10-frame beep. And yet it's even longer, so it's 20 frames wide. And also double deep. The swarms that come out of that usually weigh at least 10 pounds. All right, everybody here has seen a 10-frame Lang deep box, correct? Who's seen one of these? 10-frame Lang deep box split into 4 smaller boxes. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways that you can raise queens. I started with the swarming just for personal nostalgia. I do think that it's a totally legitimate way to have your bees raise queens. You can still select from them. Many people over in Europe still run skep apiaries, where they run whole yards with just these straw baskets that have been in existence for over 100 years, that preserve the cow dung and shelter from the rain like that. But Lorenzo Langstroth created this amazing tool that allows us to take the frames out of the box and read the hive like a book. We can take one page and then the next page, and we can really observe exactly what's going on in the heart of the colony. We can look at the brood pattern, we can look at the health of the larva, we can look at all these things. And as soon as he created that, a whole world of possibilities opened up about the way that we can manipulate hives and change them and shape them. Being a commercial queener, in a lot of ways, I think is one of the most invasive, kind of terrifying things that a person can do to bees. Pretty much the farthest from natural that you can get in some ways, and then in other ways not, because bees are incredibly able to adapt to just about any situation. So this box is really awesome because it has 4 compartments. Here's one, there's 4 mini frames in this one, 4 mini frames in that one, 4 in here and 4 in here. There's an entrance going in each direction. These 2 things here are internal feeders. Each compartment has a direction going into one of the quadrants. So in theory, if everything's working properly, the virgin queens can't get into the other little box section and kill each other. Obviously, things don't always work properly. This is a picture from Mike Palmer's apiary in upstate Vermont. This is a close-up here of the 2 separate compartments. And what we do there is we stack them up, these 4 ways, on top of one another, 2, 3, 4 boxes high for winter. And they winter like that as 4 different, actually what we do is first we move the feeder, we move this feeder to the end, and then we catch one of these queens and sell her, and let the other one take over the whole side of the box. So they winter with 2 queens in each box alongside one another, and they keep each other warm. It's a really handy tool. Not as useful in Florida, but still very cool for space conservation. The smaller you can make your mating nuke, the more queens you can create with the smallest amount of resources. People even use these tiny little styrofoam boxes that are about this big. They're pretty wild. And I'm going to show you some other cool alternative boxes for queen raising as well. So in the spring, we come and we break up these boxes. These are big, tall hives. They have to have a lot of bees in them. You never know what you're going to find. It's generally pretty difficult to find the queen. This is a long day's work. But we do this every 4 days. Everyone's got a different way that they like to run their queen raising schedule. But Mike Palmer runs his based on an 8-day program that's very popular in the Northeast. And his is two 8-day programs overlapped. So every 4 days he's grafting. Every 4 days he's catching queens. Every 4 days he is, making splits for about 10 weeks, which is as long as the season is. So here we are taking 1 frame of open larva, 1 frame of brood, capped brood, 1 frame of feed, and an empty frame, and putting those into a quadrant of the box with a shape of bees and shutting the lid. Tying it on, loading them on the truck, and taking them to a mating yard. Mike really runs only 1 big mating yard. You can have as many mating yards as you want. You can have every yard be a mating yard. You can have a cell raiser in each yard that's only dedicated to the genetic line of those bees that you keep in that yard. You can do just about anything. That's the cool thing about queen raising. You can make it work however you want to make it work, and there's infinite possibilities. This is the mating yard set up in upstate Vermont, looking very idyllic in a clover field. This is us. Mike is here, waving. This is Kate and Adam, and they're the other 2 full-time employees of French Hill last summer. And this colony is all made up of brood that either wasn't a good enough larva frame, wasn't a good enough capped brood frame, or didn't have enough food to be used. And so all of these were just combined and left for the summer pigment. Here's another picture. This is actually the recombining in the fall time. We're taking these mating nukes in these boxes and putting them back on top of each other with a piece of newspaper in between. Who's done that? Combine 2 hives with newspaper in between. All right, you can do it with these 2. Poke a hole on either side. Looks great. I wish I could zoom in on this one. Some people like to use just simple 5-frame mating nukes, 5-frame laying deep nukes as mating nukes. You don't have to use anything in particular. You can just go out into your backyard, steal the queen from 1 10-frame deep hive, and you're a queen raiser. Because they're going to raise a queen. You did that on purpose. You manipulated them into raising a queen from the characteristics that you wanted them to have. That's probably going to be the most practical application for a lot of people in this room. You can also make splits. So you can go in and you can steal the queen from that 10-frame deep, and then you can put a frame of brood. Say you have 10 frames of brood. So you have 8 frames of brood. You can take 1 frame of brood, and then you can put each of those in its own 5-frame nuke box with an empty frame or a frame of nectar, some foundation and feeder. Feed them up, and you're going to have 8 new colonies. They'll each raise a queen, as long as you make them strong enough. But you don't want to make them too strong, because then acceptance, if you're going to give them a queen cell that you've crafted, will go down. It's all very complicated, and if I'm not making any sense to you, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me, and we can backtrack and do more basics. All right, this is a cell builder or a cell raiser. What that basically is a box of bees that's very strong, queenless, and packed into a tight space. They have to be queenless when you're first starting the cells, but they don't have to stay queenless. You can either have a queenless starter finisher, where you start and finish the cells in the same box in a queenless state. You can have a queenless starter and then finish them over a queen-right finisher. So you'll have an excluder, and you'll place that box with the cells in it over top of that excluder, and the bees will care for them and feed them. Some people do this after 24 hours, some people after 48, some people after 5 days. Some people let them stay in the queenless the whole time. You do sometimes have problems with drift, especially if it's a broodless cell raiser. For instance, I have been in the habit recently of using bait hives that are filled with bees. I do a cutout. First, I turn it upside down, I drum all the bees out. I'll show you some images of this later too. I cut out the brood, I zip tie it into frames, I put it over an excluder, I save it for a week later when I'm going to do a graft with a cell raiser that does have brood in it. But in the meantime, I use just the bees. I give them one frame of eggs and young larvae just to keep them from drifting. I take their queen away, I leave them queenless for a few hours. I come back, I take the eggs and larvae away, and I replace it with only 1 to 3 day old larvae that I have selected from a breeder colony whose qualities I like, and put into these tiny plastic cups, one of which is floating around somewhere in the room, and turned upside down. And they'll raise a queen cell from each of those. You also want a lot of resources, so you want to feed them very well. Nutrition is of the utmost importance, especially with queen rearing. And one of the things they need when they're raising brood and taking care of babies is pollen. They're not going to actually feed pollen to the queens that they're raising, but they need it for their own nutrition to be able to produce vitellogenin, so that they can make royal jelly, which is what's fed to the young queen bees. It's also fed to all of the other queen bees, but the fact that they're not fed pollen directly is critical in determining whether they'll be a queen or a worker. This is Mike Palmer harvesting pollen from a Sundance crop. It can be pollen sub. I believe that it's inferior. I could be wrong. I'm totally open to science proving me wrong about that. Absolutely. You know what I do? I use the removals. So when I do, because I hang so many bait hives, I'll do a removal from a bait hive and I'll end up with, a few pounds of nectar and bee bread and pollen. They won't take it. If you stick it in a hive, they won't eat that bee bread. They're storing that. They don't want to eat it. But if you mix it with warm water and use a hand drill with one of those cement mixer attachments that looks like an egg beater, and then you just drill that so you mix the whole thing up, it becomes kind of a slurry and paste. You add some warm water to it, mix it up a little more, and then you have cell raiser feed. It's rich in pollen, it's full of nectar. You don't have to buy sugar. It's very convenient.
You just leave the wax in there and mix it up too?
I strain the wax out by hand because I do most of I don't have a shop, so I do all of my processing and stuff in the yard. I just scoop it out with my hands and squeeze it, and I put it in. I have a robbing station in some of my bee yards where it's a location more than 100 feet away where I can put anything that's wet and sticky and the bees can eat it without trying to kill each other near the hives. Yes?
When you start your raising your queens in the spring, what would your minimum temperatures be at night and during the day? What are you looking for?
Minimum temperatures. It's a little more complicated than that because I think it's also strongly related to the light. How long there's daylight in the day. But as far as temperatures, I definitely would not want it to be going below 55. Although honestly, in the North Country of New York where I live, it's not uncommon for it to drop into the 40s.
Okay, I'm from Ontario, Canada, close to New York, so
Yep.
when, using New York as the example, when would May?
May. Yeah, May 11th was the day of the first draft last year in upstate Vermont. I did my first draft right around then as well. And that's about when I expect to start every year, but you can always expect the unexpected in the Northeast. So, you can get snowed in at the end of April and then your date's pushed back a week. All right, moving forward. This is grafting. Grafting is a process where you take that young larva and you put it into these cups, you put them on a cell bar, you turn them upside down. I don't have any cell bars. I usually just use those top bars that have a groove in them. Any top bar of a Lang deep will have a groove in them. I don't worry about the many racks. You can just stick those little plastic cups right into that groove. And if it's too big, you just put a little dot of wax in there. You just stick it in the wax, and you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. You can do it in your own backyard. It's super easy. There's several types of tools to choose from. The young lady in this photo is Lauren Jennings of Louisiana, and she is holding a Chinese push-button plastic grafting tool with a bamboo plunger. I prefer the bamboo plunger. I like to get it wet before I use it. Anyone who plays a woodwind instrument knows that wood expands when you expose it to water. I think it also softens the wood a little bit so that it damages the larva less when you're plunging it. I don't know if I'm right about any of these things, but I know that Mike has been doing this for 45 years, and he always keeps the grafting tool in his mouth while he's doing other things with his hands, so it's also a habit that I've picked up. When you're grafting, you want to plunge that tool straight down into the cell, and the tongue will flex by itself. You don't have to scoop or dig or tear down the sidewalls. You just get it lined up vertically, you put it down and pick it up. It almost seems like the faster you do it, the more smoothly it goes. It's like a use the force type of situation. These are queen cells. These happen to come from my Commerce apiary. He uses enormous cell builders and makes big fat queen cells and does a lot of really complicated things with the scheduling. I'm not going to get into any of the timing other than the fact that it takes 10 days for a queen cell to mature. From the day that you graft, starting to count the day after the day of the graft, on day 10 is when you should put the cells in. You can also put the cells in on day 9, but it's ideal to put them in on day 10. If you put them in on day 11, you're going to go to look for them and they're going to be gone because the first version will have emerged and killed all the others. So you want to definitely look really closely at the calendar when you're trying to do this in this particular way. If you're not ready for that level of detail, I would recommend doing something a little more backyard beekeeper friendly, like stealing your queen on one day and then coming back 10 days later and seeing which frames have cells on them, and then you can take one frame out of it. You can take all the frames that have cells and put one in each box and make however many splits you have natural cells. You can also cut them out with a razor blade or something else sharp, but that gets pretty precise, and you really don't have to go to that much, trouble. They'll sort it out amongst themselves. All right. You can also order queen cells in the mail, or you can go pick them up. There's a lot of really awesome providers in the area, especially the Mixas over here, Summer Groveland, I think. They're excellent. They have great genetic lines. They do a really good job. Their product is high quality. This is a box of queen cells that was shipped to us in New York a couple summers ago with cover bees on them. They're amazingly resilient when they're young and when they're old. They get fragile right around the day when they're being capped, and that's like day 5. So day 5, 4 to 7, I don't bother them. Before and after, it's okay to check. And if you're bored with all this Langstroth stuff and you want to try something different, you can make a cell raiser out of just about anything. You can raise queen cells in top bar hives. You can raise queen cells in Warray-style hives. This is a modified Warray-style hive that's double long, so it looks like a top bar. It's a rectangular box. Towards the front, this is the entrance. The comb at the front is entirely empty. This one right here has nectar and pollen. There's 2 gaps. You see this one and this one? That's where the grafts go. This comb is also packed with pollen that's powdered in a coffee grinder and then rubbed into a dark old comb and then drizzled with honey. Because sometimes if you don't drizzle it with honey, they think it's trash and they throw it away. You come back the next day and you see a pile of this beautiful pollen that you pay so much money for. It's sitting on the front of your hive. So, the nectar dousing is helpful. And then here is brood that has been banked above an excluder for at least 5 days. They'll still try to raise queens from the 5-day-old larva. They'll fail, but they'll waste energy and resources. So it's better if you bank it for 7 days. It's even better if you bank it for 10 days. Because what you want in a cell raiser is not necessarily capped brood, or even the bees emerging with bites on them. You want the young nurse bees that are ready to feed. You just want to feed. You want to pack food into those young queen bees. And you want to make them really fat. And so you want those young bees. So you have this brood here. You can put in a few combs every week and reuse this queenless starter finisher, or you can do any kind of thing you can come up with. The nectar gets rotated to the back and gets taken out and harvested for use every week as well in a system like this. This is a 7-day system. This is what Sam Comfort of Anarchy Apiaries and I were using raising queens for the last couple of years. He's into some more natural cell experiments now, but this is a really fun system that I still consider one of my favorite ways to raise queens. It's a 7-day cycle, so you're catching queens out of a nuke every 21 days. It means that they're able to have capped brood when you pull the queen. So you can really assess the quality of the queens. You can see the laying pattern. You can see the health of the mating nuke. I really find it useful. You also know what you're doing every day of the week. So you don't have to worry about, oh, this day 4 and day 8 and day 16, and it's all so confusing. No, it's like, okay, it's Monday, I graphed today. It really keeps things simple. These are the front of those cell builders. You want to have a lot of bees on the front. Sometimes there's ridiculous amounts of bees on the front. I've actually seen these with the entire front of the cinder block covered in bees. I think that's probably a little excessive. You don't need to go totally overboard, but you just want to have a lot of bees packed into a small space to have success. You do want them to be able to get in and out. These are entrances. They'll often bivouac all around the front of the colony here, and then you can leave some hanging space inside of the cell builder too for them, around where the cells are going to go, so that you'll open it up and you'll see them all festooning, and then you'll kind of drop the cells right into that nest of bees that are festooning. Everyone, who knows what festooning is? Festooning is, you ever seen those pictures where the bees hold hands? They're like a chain of monkeys, they hold hands and feet, and then they string like this along in between the frames. That's festooning. That's what they do to build wax. And it's also what they do to just hang out when they're kind of in a swarm mode. All right, this is what we call a mating yard. A whole bunch of mating nucleus colonies all together. In this image, one of these stands has 4 mating nukes. This box on the bottom is a 2-way mating nuke with a divider in the middle, 1 entrance in each direction. The next box is a feeder room. This one is another one at a 45-degree angle to the original one with 2 entrances. So you have an entrance in each direction. There's a few steps between each of them. That's about the closest I would want to go. Sometimes I run mine on pallets, and I put 4 on each pallet. And it takes up a lot more space, but I think that it might contribute to better mating success because they're able to more easily find their colony when they're navigating back, because they do use visual navigation. This is a mating nuke that is ready to be caught. You don't want to let them go more than 3 weeks, especially not here, especially not if they're small. If they're small, they're just going to end up swarming on you again. And then you're going to lose the whole reason why you put the resources into this in the first place. So you definitely want to concentrate a lot on the timing. Waiting longer than 21 days to catch a queen out of a small mating nucleus will not have you meet with success. All right. Just to show you a little bit about these cool alternative boxes, they're modeled after the Waré hive, which was originally called the People's Hive and created by Emile Waré in France a number of years ago. And he called this box the People's Hive because he wanted to bring the means of production back to the beekeeper. He wanted people to be able to make a box out of just about anything and accomplish, the harvesting of honey and the raising of queens and the cultivation of good, gentle stock and all this without the expense of a Langstroth hive. Has anybody ever been shocked at the price of a Lang setup when they were first getting into beekeeping? There's absolutely no way that I could run my business if I had to only purchase Lang equipment. I do work with a lot of Lang equipment, but that's only because I'm now selling nucleus colonies and can earn that money to pay for that. This is awesome because you can use just about anything. These are rough cut 1x6s. They're pine. You can make them out of plywood. You can make them out of pallets. You can make them out of masonite. This Reflectix stuff is really cool. You can get it at Lowe's in the HVAC department. It's used for insulation. It's about $50 for a big roll of it, and you can use it for everything. Bottom boards, inner covers. It's excellent because you can actually peel it back while you're looking for the queen. So instead of popping the lid off of a mating nuke, you can peel it back gently, and you're way less likely to make the bees run. When you're catching queens, you want to use as little smoke as possible. You want to do it in the warm part of the day so that the sun is shining on the hive to also calm the bees and have them move slower. And you want to be very gentle in your movements, and you want to look precisely at the comb that you think that she's going to be on first. You want to make a little bit of space around that comb so that you don't roll or jostle the bees while you're pulling the frame out. All these things will help you locate the queen more easily. It can be very difficult to find queens. Sometimes it's the most preventative thing for people moving forward in beekeeping. But you'll find if you don't oversmoke them, you wear the amount of gear and protection that you need to feel comfortable and not have to use a whole bunch of smoke, it'll be a lot easier to find them. So this is a little progression. This is the beginning. Now you see it open. You can see how there's a divider board here, and there's 4 combs here. You can pull those out. There's one, little brood on it. And then when you find the queen, there's a couple different ways that you can mark her if you want to do that. You can either pin her down onto the comb between your fingers, or you can pick her up either by the thorax or the wings. You don't want to pick her up by the feet because that can damage her tarsal segments, which are a main part of how she transmits pheromone in the hive. If there's something wrong with the way that she communicates through pheromones, the workers will not accept her and they will supersede her. This is a picture of Sam Comfort and I catching queens and making splits from brood harvested in the mating yard. We have these really nifty little red wagons. They're my favorite. You can keep all your tools in it, and you can just roll around the mating yard. You got like a top or a bottom board over the wagon. You can store the queens underneath it. It creates a little shade pocket where they can't get baked in the sun. You can have all of your extra frames and equipment and everything in there. I recommend the hand pump spray bottles also from Lowe's so that you can wash your hands in case they get sticky so the queens don't stick to them. So you can do this. Learning to handle queens is something that is a challenge for a lot of people. I recommend starting with drones. Start by taking the gloves off in general, and then start by trying to grab drones. They can't sting you. If you squish them and kill them, they're kind of expendable, you know. It's sad when they're alive, but there's, you know, they die in the winter anyway, and not all of them are bound for success. So it's a fairly, I think, reasonable way to practice handling these. And then you can move on to workers. I only recommend grabbing workers by the wings because if you try for the thorax, they can usually bend around and sting you. All right. You know, up to this point, I've been talking a lot about systems that are used in kind of small-scale commercial queen raising. Most of the people I've worked with have between 1,000 and 2,000 hives, and they're raising queens on a scale that looks like this or bigger. I am raising queens on a slightly smaller scale. These are some queens that I shipped to Maine last year in a container that I did not have the right type of cages for, so I just taped them in there. It was actually quite a musical experience. They were all piping. Who knows what piping is? Singing. Definitely singing. So the virgin queens and also sometimes the mated queens, sometimes even from within the queen cell, will make this sound that is audible to the human ear. You can hear it even better if you have a stethoscope and you place it up against the side of the hive body. And it sounds like sort of, but all different pitches, and you can hear the different voices of the individual virgin queens when they're in there. And they use this as a way to communicate with one another and locate one another so that they can fight to the death. So obviously it's very distressing for them all to be right next to one another trapped in this box. But it is also entertaining. Here's me with some queen cells. That temperature question, as you can see, I'm putting in queen cells. I'm wearing 2 sweaters, and one of them is wool. It was not very warm that day. So you can raise queens in pretty cold weather. You can also raise queens in very hot weather. The biggest problem with the hot weather is you don't want to leave any combs out in the sun or leave the lid off too long, or your combs will melt. Especially in the Florida in the summer. I have had, if you're foundationless or if you use top bars, if you have that comb up for too long, the wax will just fall right off of the wire. All right, here's a queen cell that has been tucked in between 2 frames here. When you're catching queens and raising queens, you're going to want to catch the queen out of the colony that you want to put a cell into approximately 24 hours before you're going to put the cell in. You can do it up to 2 days, but they may start to create their own queen cells, at which point they might not accept yours. They do. Only in the air, never inside. No, they don't really do anything. They don't even poop inside. The other bees literally out of that and discarded. And they only mate in the air. They mate with once in their lives, which might be a series of mating flights over a few days. They'll mate with anywhere from like 1 to 40 drones. And then they store that sperm for the rest of their life in an organ called the spermatheca. And they're able to choose and turn on and off when they're laying an egg, whether it will be fertilized or not. The eggs that are not fertilized are drones. So drones are essentially, the expression is drones have no fathers. Drones are essentially a carbon copy of their mother. So bees are entirely matrilineal in their reproductive efforts. It's essentially like one queen is mating with the genetic copy of another queen. All right, this is my fun experiment that I've been up to. So in July, I put up 101 bait hives all over southeast Florida. They were 5-frame swarm boxes with the tops and bottoms screwed on. And now I'm using those to raise queens and create mating nukes. So what I do is I unscrewed them. I removed the brackets by which they were hung to trees, approximately 5 feet in the air. It's recommended by Tom Seeley that you hang them a little bit higher, but a 5-frame deep bait hive can weigh up to 50 pounds. So if you're by yourself and it's 2 in the morning when you're taking down this bait hive, I want to be able to rest it on my shoulder when I'm standing. So for me, that's about 5 feet. But you can adjust that based on your willingness to carry a ladder. My trunk is pretty small. All right, so you take this, you turn it upside down. It could look like this. This one was my personal favorite. That's why I chose this picture. You wonder why the bees build in the ways that they do. It's pretty amazing, having the combs going this way and this way. But you turn it upside down. You place an empty 5-frame box on top of it with another lid or bottom so that it's dark. And then you smoke them and you drum. So you'll take the side of your hand or the ball of your hand or the palm and rhythmically hit the box. And once you've done this for 2 to 3 minutes, all the bees will run up into the other box, hopefully including the queen. If you stick with it for a full 2 minutes, oftentimes the queen will be there. I would say like 75% of the time I get the queen on the first try. You're able to cage her, do whatever you want, kill her if she's mean. And then you have all these bees, and I like to use the bees as a queenless starter. And then I use the brood to bank either for a queen raiser, a cell raiser for next week, or I'll just chop it up and use it as mating nukes. As mating nukes, mating nucleus colonies. This is an image of the bees running from the box up into the entrance of what I'm going to use as a cell builder after drumming. This is all the bees hanging from the sides of the box. When you've drummed them, they'll be hanging in sheets on the sidewalls of the box. This is I like to use zip ties to put the comb into frames. Obviously, this is not the most spectacular brood pattern you've ever seen. We're looking pretty good over here. It's getting a little spotty over here. I don't keep anything that looks worse than that. But it is really useful to be able to kind of go through a round or two of brood breaks. So you can push it a little bit because this is going to get a cell. And all this brood's going to emerge and it'll get cleaned up by the bees as you go through rounds of putting cells in. It can be a really lovely and beautiful experience raising queens. There are a lot of awesome mornings. There are a lot of beautiful views. There's a lot of magic. A lot of beautiful brood, a lot of amazing bees, a lot of good queens. There's also a lot of challenges. This is a queenless colony. Sometimes they don't mate well. Sometimes you miscalculated how early or late you could raise the queens. Sometimes they mated with drones that are mean. Sometimes they didn't mate with enough drones. Sometimes your yard is located in a place where there isn't a drone congregation area. A drone congregation area is a place where drones go to flying circles looking for virgin queens. And they all go together. It's quite amazing. They have very powerful flight muscles, and as soon as they reach sexual maturity, they go out every day, and they just fly all day. Until they find a queen, and once they mate with her, they die. Or they return to the colony. And then if that doesn't happen, obviously for this colony that didn't happen, you'll end up with a colony that's made almost entirely up of drones. Sometimes this happens. You put a cell in, they don't like it, they make their own. If you see a cell that has this smooth edge, perfectly round circle open, that's an emerged queen cell. That's not a torn down queen cell. That means that this natural cell that's on the comb is the genetics that's in that mating nuke, and that the cell that you grafted and put in there did not work. That happens. Sometimes the crosses are hot. There's all sorts of challenges and perils. Sometimes they do this and then they succeed, and this is a virgin queen inside of this cell. So if you go in and you find a cell that's fully mature with a virgin queen in it sooner than expected or later than expected or at a time that doesn't fit with your schedule, then you know that virgin is not of the genetics that you're searching for. This is another peril. Sometimes the drones are not sexually mature. So this is an image, it's not the best image ever, but you can test this by taking a drone and essentially milking him. So you take the base of the first joint of your fingers and you place it at the very top of his abdomen, between his thorax and abdomen, and then you roll your fingers shut and squeeze his abdomen out. And you'll see the phallus come out, and you'll see the two horns that it has, and they curl out. It's pretty amazing. It's like something out of Pan's Labyrinth. And then this white milky substance comes out, and that's the semen. And if there isn't any of that, or if there isn't enough of that, then you know that you really ought to not be raising queens right now. So it's sad, but it's also a very helpful diagnostic tool. Another peril is beetles. In Florida, you never want to make your mating nukes too weak. If you don't put enough bees in your mating nukes, they will slime out. Ways to prevent sliming out: you can use beetle traps with mineral oil and apple cider vinegar. You can run a bead of mineral oil around the bottom board of the colony or along the edges of the top bars. Be careful with mineral oil, it also kills bees. Don't get it on them, and don't put it somewhere where you think they're going to walk over it a lot. My favorite method, though, is the microfiber towels. So you can get microfiber towels anywhere, at Walmart, and you can get them at the Bee Supply store or in the catalog. You can use the Brawny Dynamax towels or the Swiffer ones, or pretty much any knockoff brand. And what happens is if the colony is strong enough, the bees will tear up the towel. The beetles get their feet stuck in it and die. Very useful tool. Sometimes the virgin queens come back and move into the stands that the mating nukes are sitting on instead of the mating nukes. Sometimes you think that there's a swarm going on, and it's really just a mating cloud. So a bunch of bees come out with her when she goes to mate, and they come back with her, and then you'll see what looks like a tiny swarm sitting in a tree, and you catch it and put it in a box, and then your other colony doesn't have a queen because she was supposed to go back there. If you leave them alone, oftentimes they'll reorient and they'll end up back where they're supposed to be. All sorts of crazy things happen while you're raising queens. You kind of just have to go with the flow. Use the equipment you have, put things together the best that you can. When you fail, don't be too disappointed. No one can really expect more than maybe 80% success, from grafting to hatching to sale of queens. There's so many things. She can get hit by a plane, eaten by a pelican. I mean, who knows? Oh, and you'll be really busy, so don't expect to have time to do any laundry. This can take over your life extremely fast, I guarantee it. And I guess my conclusion is, at the end of the day, just make sure you catch the queen, which I certainly did with this little muffin. This is Melly, my bee dog. All right, I'm gonna open the floor for questions. If anybody has any questions about backyard queen rearing or commercial queen rearing or just general stuff about queens, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
The microfiber towels, there's several different sort of texture levels of them. Some of them are like a chamois, and some of them are like have big fingers on them. Does it matter?
I don't know. I've been running experiments.
Okay.
I pick them and I put different ones in colonies that are in the same yard, and then I see which ones are successful. But you have to moderate for hive strength to do an experiment like that, because if they're not the same strength, you won't have accurate results.
Yeah.
I encourage you to try everything. See how it goes. Yes.
You self-mated queens, and how do you control them being mated rather than mated?
So you know that they're mated because there's eggs in the mating nuke that you caught them out.
So they come back to lay.
They come back and they lay, yes. And I do sell mated queens. I am actually not currently selling queens this year because I'm hogging them all for myself because I want 500 colonies. But I know that Sam is selling queens of Anarchy apiaries. He has awesome genetic stock. And I like to actually make sure they have not just eggs, but capped brood before I actually catch them and sell them. Anybody else?
Yeah, you use the term plug case, what do you, the Chinese grafting tool.
I use the Chinese, yeah.
You just go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, into the cup, back and forth, or is there like,
Do you mean
get
on the bar?
One larvae, put it in the cup, you wash your Chinese tool, and then go to the next one, or
Yep.
you just go.
I keep the tool in my mouth. And I eat the royal jelly in between cells. Yeah. Some people dip it in Listerine, some people dip it in, I don't know. All the old timers I've ever worked for eat the royal jelly. That's all I ever learned. That's how I do it. Yeah. Anybody else?
Smart trash you had, you put those with the foundation or just empty boxes, like they were just free forms of
They're empty. If you put frames in them, it lowers the likelihood that a swarm will move in. This is scientifically proven. Not so much that it's not worth it. If you put frames in them and you catch bees and they build on the frames, you're doing great. If you put frames in them and the bees move in and they don't build on the frames, you have a huge mess. You're going to be cutting honey out of the crevices of frames. It's such a pain. I just screw the tops and bottoms on.
Empty.
Yes, empty.
After you do your grafting and you have all your cells, and you're ready to put them in their individual boxes, do you put more than one cell in each one to make sure you get at least one survivor?
Only if I have extra. Yeah, I shoot for one in a box, and if I have extra cells, I'll put one. I'm going to take maybe one or two more questions, and then I have a push-in cage demonstration for you guys to see. Yes?
So how long do you give the queen, and I guess you probably take notes and keep track of what it does before you determine whether you like the genetics or not? If it, say it gets a disease in one of your hives, do you totally say, no, that's not a good queen, or do you wait till see if the queen clears up the disease, or da-da-da-da?
Yes. In New York, they winter. If they don't make it through the winter, I don't breed from the demos. In Florida, it's a little bit trickier because the cycle is so fast and we don't have winter. So I would say the whole, do they recover from disease, that's a really good sign, for sure.
And you do mite counts?
Yep, I do alcohol washes.
Because you're more comfortable with the quality of that alcohol wash for counting?
I think that they're more effective than sugar rolls. Yeah, and honestly, all the bees that I've ever done a sugar roll, if you shake them hard enough for it to work, they're probably going to die.
Yeah, that's what I thought, right?
Yeah, because their gut, if you accidentally damage just one bee, the guts get mixed up with the sugar, and then that gets all over the other bees, and it's just that. Okay, I'm gonna. Do we have to leave like exactly in 2 minutes from now, or can we have like a little bit of playroom? All right, I'm gonna come down here. Who's got the queen? There's a queen floating around. There's a few queens. So I'm gonna come down to the middle of the room, and I'm gonna have people make a circle around me. And whoever really wants to see the most can just try to get the closest, because there's a lot of you. Will it alarm about one of these doors? smaller, only one bee can get out of it at a time. The bigger hole where you pull the whole thing back is a little trickier. You kind of have to quickly put your finger over it so that the bee can't get out. And then when you're pulling only the queen out, I like to play pinball with it, right? So I have finger, going through the queen's face. Her face looks really different when she's looking up at you out of this game than what we have. I have the queen in my hand the whole time. You can use your hand as a queen cage. In a real pitch, you can use your mouth as a queen cage. She can sting, but they rarely ever sting. Alright, so wire cutters. This is a screen that came out of one of those 5-frame cardboard nuke boxes. You know, I like to reuse things. So I don't really recommend doing this with the queen again, but I just well, if you guys really want to see that, the problem with putting her in your mouth is she doesn't want to come out. Because it's dark in there, and so if you open your mouth, she just tries to run down your throat. You kind of have to like lock her down. Okay, so you pull the pushing cage down like this. I just keep pieces of string in my car at all times in case I have to do this in an emergency. Fold it down, cut a little groove. Each of the 4 sides where the whole thing is folded. You can make it any size you want. You want to search for an area, the imaginary true frame here, that has emerging brood. Emerging brood means that you can see the bee's face coming out of the wax cabinet. It doesn't mean that you think that they might be ready soon. It doesn't mean that, like, you know. It means you actually see the face and the little antenna and the jaws chewing their way out. If that's not the case, then there will be no one to take care of this queen that you're trying to introduce while you're waiting for her to get accepted. The beauty of the pushing cage is that the queen can actually be actively laying underneath this cage for several days, and it gives the bees the opportunity to accept her. It's especially useful for very mean bees. If you have a hive that's a problem hive that you can't deal with, that you don't want to burn, that you can't like really do anything about, if you can find the queen, which is not always that easy, and kill her, then you can use this pushing cage to introduce a queen. If you just stick a queen in a cage like this into a hive like that, they will kill her. Even if you put a cap on this cage, they will kill her. Even if you put a cap on this cage and leave it in there for 4 days, they'll kill her. She has to smell like a bee. And that only happens when she's laying eggs. So you fold these flaps, like so. I haven't been showing you very much. So you fold them down, and then say I found, you want to have at least 3 cells of emerging brood. You can see only one face, that's fine. As long as you see one face, there's enough emerging brood around. But you want to make sure there's enough so that she has enough attendance inside the cage. So 3 minimum. 5 is better. If there's 20 or 30, that's also fine. But you also want some open space and some food. So it's some nectar. If there isn't nectar, you can supplement by smearing nectar through the wire, but not too much, you'll drown the queen. And if there is an empty space, but there's a lot of emerging brood, that's fine because there's about to be empty space. So here we are. You've removed the frame that you like. You've shaken it sharply to get all the bees off, like this. You use a bee brush or a piece of grass, your hand or something to get the bees off it. You walk a little bit away from the side. You walk a little bit away from the colony so that there's no one harassing you, because it's really tragic when you cut the queen in half with the pushing cage. So say this is the spot we pick. The queen is still in my hand. I'm going to grab her right now. I have her by the thorax. You can also grab her from the top and bottom of the thorax or by the wings. When you grab her by the wings, you want to press them together and grab as close to the thorax as possible so that when she struggles, she can't hurt herself. You don't want to be holding her by one wing, so she can then use all her strength to push against you and pull her own wing up. If you want her to stay calmer, you can place her legs on. You see how she grabbed my finger and was right away calmer? You can place her legs on your finger and then hold her with your other 2 fingers. So you have like a queen landing table here with your finger. I like to introduce her into the cage by the wings. So you place her on the comb, you make sure her feet are down, and then you put it down gently. She's now running around free inside of this. She's looking for nectar. She's a little disturbed by the situation. If this was real life, she would be immediately sticking her head in a cell and gorging on the nectar because she's been stuck in this cage only eating sugar. You press the cage all the way down into the comb. This is where you need to learn the trick of how much to pull the lid. You want enough space for two bees to go piggyback on top of each other between the screen and the wax comb. If there isn't that much room, then they're not going to be able to care for her. And if you make the wire too close, you'll have a slime out start inside of your pushing the cage. You cannot have the wire touching the comb so that there's an area where the bees can attend to, or the hive beetles will slime it out. Now she's in here, you put her back in, into the colony, and then you've re-cleaned your hive. It's probably the most successful way I know how. Yes, but only because it means that you can't push the frames together. And when you're putting it in and you're pushing the frames back together, make sure you have your eyes on where the cage is, because if it's too high, it's okay, but you don't want to push the frame next to it all the time. You have to leave a frame out of the box temporarily, that's fine too. You come back in 4 days. You can come back in 2, she might have been accepted. You can come back in 3, she's probably been accepted. But after 3 days, you might have another queen. There might be 2 queens, you might have killed a queen, but the mean one is still in there laying. You don't even know. So if you just assume after 3 days, there's still eggs outside here, which makes sense because there was a queen in there 3 days ago. After 4 days, there's not going to be any eggs outside of this cage. You'll know for sure there's no other queen right now.
You don't complete that 4-day, go back in and then we'll
There won't be queen cells. If they accept her, they will, even if they started making queen cells during the first day or 2, they've accepted her, they will tear them down. So that's better than if you go back and like this. And as long as they're not trying to sink through the cage, even if there's queen cells in the hive, I don't worry about it. She's laying eggs, and everyone's calm, and there's queen cells, as long as they're not capped, I just leave them.
So she's the one to be in there by herself and all the other ones just kind of check it out.
Yeah, so right at first, if it's a mean colony, the other ones will be trying to kill her through the screen. But they will eventually start feeding. You're going to see them walking casually back and forth across the screen.
There's also the beauty for
And the emerging. Yeah, exactly. So you're putting this cage over cells where the little bee is coming out. And they have never seen it. They have no idea. So they assume that she's there. All right. And they care for her regardless. And then the other bees essentially now I see.
That way, it's necessary to be stacked high in space, so that when they try to sting her, she gets high.
Yes. Yeah, because they can sting her through the cage. If she can get away, she's fast.
Yeah.
After the 4th day, and when you lift the cage off, you make sure that her little feet are on that wax pole. Because if you're here, you're like, oh, my queen's accepted. Like, you just open it, she's on the cage, she's just flying. She won't be able to find her way back because she didn't mate in that colony. So, right now she's on the cage, I'm waiting. I wait maybe,